Well, partly, well, it's many things. So I'm not going to look for the key one. I don't believe in that. It's always a combination of factors that are going on. I would like to begin, however, with just a comment, given what we have been discussing now for weeks and months, you and I and Michael Hudson and so on. Uh, in Europe, the way right-wing governments have been mobilizing their people over the last 3 years against Russia in the Ukraine war has been by making a claim that what Mr. Putin in Russia is about is not so much Ukraine, but his intention to grab that language now, to grab more of Europe, that he has imperialistic or colonialistic intentions about a greater Russia that might include, who knows what parts of northern, central, this is regularly discussed in the media of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, but far beyond that, in Central Europe, in Western Europe, it's a very popular way for sitting right-wing or center-right political leaders to justify the amount of their resources they are devoting to the Ukraine war, the amount of their resources they are devoting to other anti-Russian measures. And as many commentators, not me particularly, but as many commentators have pointed out, and here let me just cite Professor John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago, who keeps saying the same thing as an academic, that there is no evidence of anything that the Russians would do. And moreover, common sense would tell you that if the Russians were to do anything like that, the opposition they would get from within all of those countries would make it militarily, economically, as well as politically a catastrophe for the Russians. And there's therefore no evidence they're going to do that and no logic. It's going to be difficult for the right-wing governments of Europe to keep talking like this when the absence of evidence that Russia is colonialism moving forward, after what we've just seen from Mr. Trump. This is the resurgence of American colonialism. Now, so far, it's only words. It's Mr. Trump drawing attention, being in the headlines. Look, otherwise, he would have been out of the headlines and we would all have been talking about Christmas. Now, this way, we were talking not only about Christmas, but Mr. Trump again. And it's even more interesting because one of the countries offended by Mr. Trump's colonialism remarks is a part of Europe, Denmark, since Denmark is the governing authority of Greenland. Long-standing. I mean, no one except the United States seems to want to dispute that. A little while ago, Mr. Trump, in his first administration, spoke about buying Greenland, and Denmark had to tell him that it wasn't for sale. Okay, in true colonial fashion, he's now suggesting that if he can't buy it, he will take it by force. Now, I want to remind you what the Europeans, including particularly Danish political leaders, have said about Russia's colonialism, for which there is no comparable statements by Mr. Putin whatsoever. But here we have the leader of the United States speaking about directly threatening a European country, Denmark, over a colonial possession that the United States is thinking about. It is for sheer political stupidity. I don't know what other words to use for it. But nothing is ever simple, and it's not simply a matter of Mr. Trump bloviating. That's part of what it is, but it's not only that. Here's a more serious way to understand all of this. When empires decline, when it becomes more and more difficult for an existing empire to hold on to its dominant global position, which is what empire means. The United States has been the dominant global power for almost a century now. But in the last 15 years, all of that has begun to peak. It's over. We are now on the downside of the American empire. And it is very typical for the United States to be engaged, on the one hand, in denial that anything like that is going on. There is no empire. The United States very rarely admitted that it had an empire. It needed to talk about democracy all the time, not about empire. Occasionally, but mostly, it had to deny the empire. And so it has become quite easy to deny that the empire is over. And we are busy denying that. For example, we just had a presidential election. During that presidential election, neither Mr. Trump, who won, nor Ms. Harris, who lost, ever said, to my knowledge, one word about a declining empire. Not at all. The closest you came was the passing remarks of Mr. Trump that because he has to make America great again, he has to find things now that he can change and he can fix to make it great again. But mostly that's general rhetoric, no admission that there is an empire, that it is declining. You know, he wouldn't talk like that. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris didn't talk like that either. So that's the denial part. But here comes the other way declining empires deal. They make gestures of fighting to become larger. In other words, they negate the downturn by becoming larger, finding a nearby poor, weak country or region which they can take. And it's not so much that they need the particular resource. There aren't that great resources in Greenland, as far as I know, but there might be. But it's not, it's not a burning necessity. Whatever it is Greenland has, I don't know. So I'm a reasonably well-informed person looking at these issues. I'm not aware of Greenland having anything to do with anything. And the United States pays fees at the Panama Canal. It has always paid fees. And like everything else, it's remarkable for a Republican who doesn't like an outcome of the market. Panama is a poor country, a small, poor country. It lives off the Panama Canal. It charges as much as it can. It's limited because every shipper has the option of shipping some other way, either having the ships go around, which is expensive, or using other mechanisms. So there are market limits, as there always are. But instead of celebrating the market, here we have this conservative expositor of free markets saying he's going to use military power, violate a treaty that has been approved by the United States Senate, the treaty back in the 1970s. It's crystal clear who owns the Panama Canal. He's just going to take. This is bravado. This is gesture, And then there's the game, the none too subtle game of suggesting that Canada, is a 51st state of the United States, and suggesting that if Mexico doesn't behave properly, he might invade Mexico. There, the reason is the drug trade, which is half a century old now, if not older. So these are gestures that are typical of a declining empire flexing its muscle, mostly to convince itself that it's not declining. And the angry response of the Danes, of the Canadians, of the Mexicans, and also of the Panamanians indicates that Mr. Trump, like his advisors, simply live in a bubble in which the rest of the world's evolution, being frightening to them, simply isn't relevant. They will, like a child, cover their eyes, and if they can't see it, then they hope it isn't there. Children usually grow up pretty quick and discover that you can do that, but it's still there. So here we have, in the same period of this decline, these actions of expansion of an empire growing. They love the imagery. But let me give you the other side. The BRICS. The BRICS going into 2025, in other words, going into something that begins in a few days, have announced they are now a system with 9 members, 9 partners, that's 18, and another 4 countries that have been invited to become members but have not yet decided, although the 4 countries are Vietnam, Algeria, Nigeria, and Turkey. Those 4 are expected to join, but they haven't yet. But they are already 18, 9 members, 9 partners, as of January 1, 2025. And let me remind everyone, these 18 are just short of, population-wise, half of the people of planet Earth, of the planet we all share. So half of them are in that. And the leaders of that are Russia, China, and India, who are politically all on the other side of the war in Ukraine, just for people to understand. And they are making that war a war that Russia will win, is winning. Okay, what else are they? Together, they're about 41%, I've done the work, of the GDP of this world, if you use purchasing power parity calculations, which are the better ones to get a realistic sense of what these numbers mean. By comparison, 41%, the G7, the United States and its major allies, are 30%. Okay? 41% of the world's wealth, and including its capacity to produce more wealth. 41% in the BRICS, 30% in the United States and its major allies, which are Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany. Wow. Economic growth this year, again, I've mentioned this before, but in this context, the IMF says the United States will grow 2.8% for the year 2024. Every other country in the G7 will grow less than 2.8%. Russia will grow more. China will grow 4.8%, and India will grow 7%. The gap is getting wider. The relative economic footprint of the G7 is shrinking. This is an empire in decline, with the statistics screaming that reality. But not in the United States, not in the regime of Donald Trump. Oh no. We are expanding. If the United States cannot grow faster, then perhaps Mr. Trump has in his mind that the way we will grow is not by developing our own economy, but rather by snatching the resources of other countries. Absorb Canada, absorb Mexico, or parts of them, or Panama, or Greenland, or fill in the blank. Where else will he go? Excuse me. The remarkable thing, Nima, is this. These are signs of living in a fantasy, of imagining possibilities that aren't there because you are so determined not to see what is. And in that way, if you allow me, I'll show you a link between that and Ukraine on the one hand, and political changes coming on the other. First, on Ukraine. The Ukraine is the same blindness, denial. The United States thought that it could expand NATO to include Ukraine. Obviously, what the United States wanted. It's what the leadership that the United States helped to produce back in 2014 with the overthrow of the old government, etc., etc. I won't, you know that history, and so does your audience, I assume. So the calculation was made. This is going to be easy. We're going to fight Russia. Russia's much poorer than the United States. It is. Russia is in deep trouble with all of the consequences of the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. That's true too. And that Russia, is afraid of the United States' nuclear weapons, which is also true. Russia is very aware that the United States dropped atomic bombs in Japan and is therefore the only country in the world that's ever done that. And everybody who thinks about this understands what that implies. So a calculation was obviously made. Why do I say obviously? Because President Biden, immediately after Russia invades Ukraine early in 2022, declares, as do Mr. Blinken, Jake Sullivan, the other advisors around Mr. Biden, and leading members of the United States Senate and House of Representatives, they all say this will be easy. We will destroy Russia. We will weaken Russia to the point where it may break apart. The value of the ruble will be zero, be nothing. They can't stand up to the Ukrainian army funded and equipped by the United States and Western Europe. They were sure of it. They wouldn't need nuclear weapons. They could, because they're afraid of that. Obviously, everybody is, but they wouldn't need that. It was wrong. It was wrong. Russia didn't collapse. Russia is stronger militarily and economically today than it was when this war began. Or even if that's not true, it's certainly stronger than we were told by our governments. We were told Russia would collapse. Russia couldn't possibly sustain this war. I want to remind everyone, the line of contact between the Russian military and the Ukrainian military has moved steadily westward. That means Russia's power is growing geographically, and that of Ukraine and the collective West is shrinking. In Europe today, the assumption is that there will be a ceasefire, that there will be negotiations, and that Russia will keep much or all of what it has conquered militarily. I mean, in the United States, we don't dare have conversations about all of this. Publicly, privately, they're there, but publicly not. That's part of denial. You made a terrible mistake. And even if Americans don't see it, everywhere else in the world, I read foreign newspapers, every other country is taking note of what I just said, that the predictions of the West as to the weakness of the East were wrong. The East, in this case Russia, is much stronger than we were told to believe. The winner in Ukraine is clear militarily. The economy of Russia has problems. It always has. It even had that before the Soviet Union collapsed. It has had extreme difficulties making the transition from what it was to what it is now. But that doesn't tell you anything because that's a constant. It's changing, but it's an economy. So having Mr. Blinken and Mr. Sullivan give speeches the last 2 or 3 weeks talking about the inflation in Russia and this is make-believe for Americans again. It's not relevant. Their economic growth is faster. They've used the war to get out of many of their economic problems, not all, but many, which, if you know anything about American history, shouldn't surprise you. How did the United States get out of the Great Depression? World War II. War put people back to work. That's what it did in Russia too. It revived their economy. It stimulated their economy. Did they have to go into debt to do that? Yes, just like the United States did during World War II. That was a time of booming American debt. But everyone understood that that war showed how powerful the United States was then. And that's again the problem. We aren't anymore. We aren't in that position. The rest of the world is not in the position it was then. All of these things are denied, and as the result, terrible mistakes are being made. It's clear in the case of Ukraine. The West didn't understand that Russia can sell oil and gas to India and China if it doesn't sell it to Western Europe. Not a problem. You misunderstood. That's one of the reasons Russia can fight the war. It can sell oil and gas to pay for the war, etc., etc. And the United States cannot prevent it. It uses one escalation after another. I mean escalation militarily by supplying F-16 fighters, supplying Abrams tanks, and all the things which they said at the beginning wouldn't be necessary. They wouldn't do it. They did it, but it didn't change anything. Likewise, they started with some sanctions, and they have escalated the level of sanctions ever since, and that doesn't work either. You know, if you're doing one policy after another and it doesn't work, if you're rational, at that point you begin to ask, well, maybe larger issues are going on here that we didn't take into account enough. That's a rational way. We're not doing that. We cannot go there. The larger issue is the declining empire, and that's a taboo. We cannot discuss that in the United States, and we punish people around the world who talk like that, or we try to as a nation. Not working out very well either. Okay, that mistake is now being made again. That's what is going on when Mr. Trump suggests taking over Canada. Can you imagine with me, all of you watching this program, what is going through the minds of the millions of Canadians and the millions of Mexicans and the millions of Danish people? Come on. What are you doing? It's like with Ukraine. The whole world is watching you lose the war. You keep saying you're winning, you're winning. Mr. Zelensky keeps saying, I'm winning, but nobody believes this anymore. And that becomes a kind of pathology. And so now we have announcements of colonial expansion. It's as if Mr. Trump, by mere assertion, is going to reverse the one thing that has been true throughout the period of the American empire. It's the end of colonialism. India was, but isn't a colony. Africans were, but aren't anymore, colonial territory. The direction of change is anti-colonialism virtually everywhere. And the two countries alone in the world that are now actively advocating colonialism are Israel in the Palestinian territories, and now the United States, who are often together the only two votes in the United Nations. This should worry you if you're an American or an Israeli. The strategy after World War II was to isolate communism, the great danger to the West. Well, communism is largely gone. But the West has isolated itself, not the rest of the world. In fact, the rest of the world, making common cause with the communist parties around the world, is by far the dominant bloc in the world today. China, run by a communist party, is the undisputed leader of the BRICS group. Cuba is now a member of the BRICS. Vietnam is a member of the BRICS, and so on. Russia, obviously. But these are signs. The United States is therefore setting itself against it. One of the reasons the United States never called itself an empire, except privately, was because they understood that the world was moving away. And they like to remind people that once the United States was a colonial territory that had to fight to break away from the dominant Britain. But nobody was fooled. They understood that the United States was replacing the European colonial powers, not refusing to. And now with Mr. Trump, at the end of the process, when the old colonial world doesn't exist anymore, he's announcing he's now going to be an explicit colonial. I mean, you're watching denial become craziness. It's when the denial is so deep and so comprehensive, that's what coming out of your mouth makes you look, well, what is the phrase used in international politics? The rogue state, the government that is much more a threat to global stability than it is the upholder of global stability. We are living through that transition. And these Christmas remarks of a colonialist nature are very powerful symptoms and symbols of what we are living through.
Richard, it seems right now in Europe, the European leaders and people are so confused, because we know that how much the war in Ukraine and the conflict in Ukraine has hit the economy of Europe. And those policy of tariffs from Donald Trump in his first term, and then by Joe Biden, and right now with Donald Trump in Washington, it's going to worsen the situation between the United States and China. And that would influence Europe as well. How do you see the new leaders of Europe, and what is going on in their mind? Because it seems that Donald Trump would be their next enemy.
Well, I think honestly, what they're doing now is virtually a kind of panic behavior. Ursula von der Leyen, the others, it's pathetic as they run around. These are people who are afraid, for good reason, that their political dominance is about to collapse. They've lived under the protection and shadow of the United States ever since World War II. Some would argue it goes back even to World War I. But it's a long time, 75 years, 100 years. It's a long time. And it has trained 2 to 3 to 4 generations of European leaders that the United States is the dominant power, and you can succeed in your country, in Germany, in Italy, in France, by granting the United States the leadership it wants. You get in exchange a fantastic service. You can have a powerful military without having to pay for a powerful military. That is, the United States provides the nuclear military umbrella. It is true, it is to the benefit, in the Keynesian economic sense, it's in the benefit of American capitalism, because this global nuclear military umbrella that the United States provides to NATO and Europe, but also globally, all of that is mostly money spent by the United States on United States corporations. There is some spillover to foreign. Foreign companies are subsidiaries or input providers to American defense, but it's mostly a support to American capitalism. You know, the budget of the United States this year will spend about $1 trillion, if you do it properly, on defense spending. That's an enormous subsidy, because it goes overwhelmingly to large corporations who then spend some of it on smaller ones, feeder corporate, but it's an enormous military industrial complex. The Europeans get the benefit of that, including the very important symbolic location of American troops in various European countries, without having to pay for it. They can therefore use the revenue they take from their own people and use it partly to subsidize their industry, helping them to compete with America. The contradictions are rich, but they can also provide what they would have had to in Europe, or else even the United States couldn't have saved them at the end of World War II. They can provide a welfare support to defeat socialism, to keep Russia on the eastern half of Europe, but to keep the western half free of socialism by having a social safety net, which they could never have afforded otherwise, but which gave them social peace without having to pay what that would have cost, because they couldn't have afforded it otherwise. I try to remind people, My family is French. So when my French family goes to the doctor, they don't pay anything for it. When my French family reaches the age, having finished school, to go into the labor force, the employer has to give them 5 weeks of paid vacation every year, which is when I go to France and spend time and see them, because we have 5 weeks. I don't get that in the United States. American workers do not get these things: free education, free medical care, and 5 weeks paid vacation. And I could go on. But the Europeans provide that. Socialists fought for it, but the capitalists made a deal. Okay, we'll give you that. You let us keep the enterprises, we're the capitalists, but we'll give you a standard of living that will make your socialism unnecessary. Wow. That deal worked in Europe, still does. But now the United States, whose empire is shrinking, doesn't want to pay for what it is. It doesn't want this game to continue because it isn't enough for the United States. And they're right. The United States spends a fortune on this military. They would like to be able to spend a little less. So they turn to the Europeans and they begin to press. They've been doing that for years, but they're pressing harder now. But the Europeans can't. What are they going to do? Tax their own people? They will be voted out of office. These right-wingers, they can't survive. They're supposed to be anti-tax. They have been celebrating dishonestly for decades. See, we're not having to raise taxes. Yeah, that's because you sold out your country to America. And the left knows that in Europe and uses that argument. And nobody has refuted it, not successfully. It sits right there. And if the right-wing governments have to come in and cut social spending and raise taxes, which is what they're trying to do, look at the pathetic Emmanuel Macron. He tried to do it. He's now dead politically. Then he appointed illegally and unethically, he appointed a prime minister having lost the election. The prime minister tried to cut social spending and raise taxes. He lasted a matter of weeks. Now he's brought in another one who will repeat this absurd. They're stuck, and they're frightened because they're stuck, as they should be. But they too are required by the support they get from the United States to also say nothing about the end of the empire. And when they confront the growing number of us who see that the empire, or if you like, the emperor, has no clothes, remember the fable? The empire is naked and looks like it's shrinking. Then they get into difficulty with the United States. You can't do that. You can't sustain it. Look, it's a lesson that has to be learned apparently every generation. And the lesson is the very things that make a certain arrangement of the world economy functional and successful, over time turn into fetters. Great word of Marx's. What is an engine of growth becomes an obstacle to growth. That's how things evolve. That's how people react to a situation, trying to find ways to profit from it. And as they do, they change the environment so the old conditions are no longer progressive, they are regressive, and they have to be changed. We are at that point now. We are at a crisis point, if you like, a shifting in the world And that's difficult, always has been difficult in the past. It's going to be difficult now. But denying that it's going on, I wouldn't give that too many more months or years to survive. Right below the surface in Europe, there is a very active conversation that I know about from my own personal interactions. There are plenty of businesses that understand what you said, Nima, that understand that they are paying a heavy price to the United States for what they're getting, much higher than the price they used to have to pay. The Volkswagen Corporation, the symbol, the emblem of a powerful European economy, built around Germany, whose economy in turn was built around exports. And those, the dominant one, the Volkswagen. Okay, they just went through the worst economic crisis of their existence as a corporation. They tried to impose on the German working class a fantastic cut. For those of you who don't know, they demanded 10% reduction of wages across the board. Let me repeat that. Not only no increase, not only no keeping up with the inflation, which is going on, but a reduction of money wages by 10% on top of what you're losing by the inflation. They were going to close 3 of the 9 VW factories in Germany. They were going to move production to Mexico. They're still going to do some of those things, but they're not going to be able to cut the wages. They're not going to be able to close 3 factories. That's the deal they made with the workers' union. The union, in turn, agreed to no wage increase in 2025 or 2026. They won't suffer a 10% cut, but they won't get anything. These are 2 years during which there's every reason to expect a significant inflation, and then they will be behind. No wage increase, rising prices, you lose. They're so frightened they accepted that as a deal. VW is still allowed to reduce by 35,000 the number of their employees via attrition. Okay, what you're watching here is a downturn of German capitalism. That's what this is, because you can be sure that when the biggest, most powerful corporation in your country, the symbol of what you have achieved, agrees to this catastrophe, then all the others will have varying greater or lesser cutbacks. And Germany was the engine for Europe. You're putting the Europeans under incredible political, ideological strain. And Mr. Trump, living in the bubble where he can be Mr. Tough Guy against the Europeans, look, he has already threatened them with tariffs since the election. He's threatened Mexico, Canada, and the Europeans with tariffs. Okay, these are his little weapons. He doesn't have much else, so he brandishes the tariffs. These are all signs of growing stresses inside a declining empire. It is classic. It's almost as if we were rehearsing a script passed down from our history. And yet it has to be still so far relatively few voices that articulate this. And I want to say, as I've said to you before, I'm happy to come onto your program because you are one of the places where this can be spoken, where people can hear this argument and then make their own decisions, how much of it they want to incorporate into their own thinking, how much they don't. But at least we are not playing the game of putting our hands in front of our eyes in order to make it. I saw in recent days, more than I could even believe, statements here in the United States, I'm speaking to you from New York City, about how marvelously great our economy and society are. It is amazing. It is amazing. The article is between two. The one I believe was coming from Jake Sullivan or Mr. Blinken, I can't remember, but it was sandwiched between two articles. One was about murder in the subway system of New York City. My wife will not go in the subways of New York, which are by far the best means of transportation around the city of New York. You can get further quicker by subway than anything else. Our automobile traffic is completely out of control, chaos. But we can't go on the train because we have so many homeless people living in the subway tunnels, that many of whom need mental health care, and don't get it, and on and on and on. The realities we are here. I'm a professor. Over the last week, universities and colleges in the United States have been notifying foreign students, of whom there are over 1 million enrolled in American colleges and universities. They've been coming here to the United States for decades in huge numbers from all over the world to study. And then many of them go back to their country of origin with a degree in whatever they studied here. They've all been sent notices. I don't know if all of them have. Many of them have been sent notices that are reported in the press here. The notice says, you, a foreign student, need to consider the likelihood, these are the words they use, that you will have increasing difficulties with your visa and your permission to study here. You may not be able to continue. Wow. This is a country, look, you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to understand that one of the crucially successful mechanisms of the American empire over the last century was educating the bright young people that could afford to come to the United States and study. Those people became fluent in English if they weren't before. They have, they get married, they have important moments of their lives here in the United States, and many of them go back and utilize their connections here in the United States for whatever they do in their home country. This created business opportunities, this created alliances, this created all kinds of benefits that accrued to the United States. Those are now going to be lost. And you know where young people are increasingly already going? To China, to Russia, to India. You understand? That's what it means, the relationship between the data I gave you about the BRICS versus the data about the G7. Everything is changing, and the direction of change is unmistakable. And yet in this country, you will read about what the universities are doing with foreign students as if it were a sign of our putting America first. That's the nicest way to say we're trying to cope with our decline, but we can't say that. So we're going to talk and do things like threaten Denmark about Greenland and threaten college students about the ability for them to finish the degree they invested in by coming here. It's extraordinary.
Richard, before wrapping up this session, when you look at these 9 countries that are going to be, they're going to be on January 1st, they're going to be BRICS partners. And you see Indonesia and Malaysia, these 2 countries are, in terms of their population, their economy, they're huge.
Right.
And you see Cuba and Bolivia. I was so happy to see Cuba in the list, but what is this message coming from BRICS to other countries all around the world?
Well, I think it's the oldest message that businesses give each other, which is the wind is changing. And the sooner you adjust, I'll use the metaphor of a sailboat. The sooner you adjust your sails, the sooner the wind will carry you. So, look, I don't want to overstate it either. Countries that join the BRICS continue to do business with Britain or France or the United States. No one is requiring that you shut down. It's not that kind. It may get there, but it isn't there yet. You know, the United States is trying to hold on to its alliance with India. And Mr. Modi, you know, he, like Mr. Erdogan in Turkey or any of the others, they are watching which way the wind grows or blows. You know, they are trying to figure out how to navigate a changing world economy. And it doesn't mean you stop everything over here and you rush over there. Okay? It's a question of saying, and by the way, this is often done very explicitly because these are not politicians standing in front of a camera. These are a group of businesses meeting in the office of some bank somewhere. And they are saying, look, we need a $1 billion loan to build a road system over here. We've gone to London and New York, and we understand what they were willing to give us, the terms. And then we went to New Delhi, and then we went to Beijing, and we asked what, and the BRICS are giving us better term. What do you want us to do? We have to raise from our people in whatever country this is the taxes to pay back the loans and to pay the interest that this project is going to cost us. And we don't, sorry. Sorry. We're going to have to raise the taxes from our people to pay back this loan and to pay interest on this loan. That's a burden on our people and our businesses to tax them. But so it is our obligation as political leaders to get a loan at the lowest interest rate under the best terms. That's what's going on in the world every day in big conversations and little ones. Little company, medium-sized company, big company. Everyone, sorry, Dima, I hope you can edit this out. Every country, every company is adjusting to this situation. Everyone is rethinking their strategy for growth. Where are my imports going to come from? Where are my exports going to be saleable? Where will I borrow? What kind of terms can I get? What kind of investment partnerships can I build? They're asking these questions to see whether they can get a better deal. They used to wonder, can I get a better deal from America or maybe from Britain or maybe from, I don't know, the Netherlands or Germany or something. In the old Cold War days, they sometimes got something from Russia, from the Soviet, but they were always so much poorer. The Soviet bloc was so much poorer than the West that often they didn't bother, and not out of political calculation. It just, one was a giant with lots of money and the other one wasn't. But now we have a completely different situation, not like the Cold War, because the BRICS, the alternative to the West, is richer than the West, has more resources, is willing to build because they're trying to emerge out from under the dominance of the United States. So they are willing to be generous partners of countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and so on. And so they're all discovering options. But they will, for the foreseeable future, they will be open to making a deal with a Western business if they can, but only if it is better than the one they can get from the East. And both the West and the East know that. Bankers in New York get it. Bankers in Beijing get it. They understand. They understand what this game is. The only place that literally doesn't understand it is the United States, because it's everywhere the signs are obvious. That's why, otherwise you wouldn't hear me speak this way. I'm not going to say such a thing if I don't see a lot of evidence. Or if I would, I'd say, well, I'm speculating, I'm thinking maybe, and there are things I'm not so sure about. For example, I'm not so sure how long will this take? Maybe there will be steps forward and then steps backward. Maybe the BRICS will make strategic errors that allow the West longer life. All of that's possible. I can't foresee the future any better than anyone else. But on the other hand, I'm not blind to what is already clearly underway. You know, when that enormous port was opened in Peru, the biggest seaport, I believe, in Latin America, certainly a brand new, absolutely modern, latest technology of loading ships, will take the products of Latin America, the southern part, Peru, Chile, Argentina, and have a direct route to Asia. That's the future. Asia will be buying what Latin America sells, and vice versa. And you know what neither of them will need? The United States or the Panama Canal, for that matter. That's changing everything. And again, it's changing it in directions. Peru, not a member of BRICS, is now going to be tied to China, which, by the way, paid for that port in Peru. So, of course, this is creating combinations, dependencies. So I wouldn't be surprised if Peru soon becomes an applicant for BRICS membership. It's the logical next step. And it's one of an immense number. If we had limitless time, I would be going through a long list of these kinds of things to show you what it means. And Cuba, which is having enormous economic difficulties, is hoping to be rescued by and that, if that happens, that will be another sign to many other countries in serious economic difficulty, like Cuba, to see in joining BRICS their best way forward, their best chance to solve these problems that have accumulated. You know, it's very much part of the world we live in, and we are not helping matters in the United States or in Western Europe by pretending that either this isn't important or it isn't happening at all. And that's what you get. The majority in my society here in the United States deny everything. And then a sizable minority say, no, yes, there's a BRICS, but it's not important. Amazing. You know, you never win a competition by underestimating who your competitor is and what resources the competitor has. And to deal with the BRICS as if it didn't matter is unbelievably self-delusional.
Thank you so much, Richard, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Yes, and my sorrow that Michael, who helps our conversations with his own insights, isn't with us as well.
He's going to be with us next week.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.